Hey guys, tonight we are embarking on a journey that might just be too relaxing, a historical deep dive so specific, so utterly mundane, that you might not even make it to the end of this sentence before your eyelids start to feel heavy. We're going to explore the quiet, unassuming act of offering a single, perfect pomegranate to the king of the gods himself, Zeus, in the hushed sanctity of an ancient Greek temple. Picture the scene, twilight softening the marble columns, the air cool and still, the scent of faint incense mingling with the earthy perfume of the fruit in your hands. You're not fighting monsters or sailing stormy seas, you're just preparing a snack for a deity. Honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer lack of peril. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's trying to drift off with me around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, imagine yourself, not as a hero or a warrior, but as someone going about a perfectly ordinary, yet deeply traditional, task in ancient Greece. You're not on the battlefield, you're not debating philosophy in the agora, you are simply preparing an offering. Specifically, you are preparing to offer a pomegranate to Zeus, king of the gods, the guy with the lightning bolts. But don't worry, this isn't going to be an epic confrontation or a dramatic plea. This is about the quiet mechanics, the gentle, almost domestic choreography of ancient piety. It's about taking something beautiful and giving it away, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with careful hands and a mindful heart. Or maybe just because your parents told you to, who knows? The air hangs thick and still in the twilight. You can almost smell the dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight filtering through the high windows of the temple. It's quiet. Not the deafening silence of a horror movie, but the peaceful quiet of a place set apart, a sanctuary where the world outside fades away. Your footsteps echo softly on the stone floor, a gentle rhythm against the stillness. In your hands, you hold the subject of our journey tonight, a single, perfect pomegranate. It's heavy, substantial, its skin a deep, burnished red, cool to the touch. Run your thumb over its smooth, slightly waxy surface. Feel the subtle ridges and bumps that hint at the treasure hidden within. This isn't just any fruit. It's a gift fit for a god. Or at least, that's the idea. Why a pomegranate, though? And why Zeus? Well, that's part of the quiet mystery we'll explore. The act itself feels almost mundane, you're just handling a piece of fruit, like you might pick out an apple at the market today. But the context elevates it. You are in a sacred space, preparing something for the very top of the divine hierarchy. It's a small act, a personal one, perhaps done out of duty, out of hope, out of a simple adherence to tradition. It's not about changing the world, it's about maintaining a connection, a subtle acknowledgement of the powers that be. Think of it like leaving a 5-star review for the cosmos. You look down at the fruit in your hands. It seems innocent enough, doesn't it? Just a round thing full of juicy seeds. But in the world you inhabit right now, this simple fruit is steeped in meaning, heavy with symbolism that has accumulated over centuries. It's a symbol of fertility, of life, of death, of the underworld, of marriage, of abundance. It's confusing, I know. It's like one fruit trying to contain the entire human experience. And you, yes you, are about to carefully prepare this symbolic powerhouse for the god known for, well, let's just say a complicated personal life, often involving other deities' wives. Bit ironic, perhaps, offering him a symbol of fertility. But hey, who are we to judge the divine dietary preferences? The focus tonight isn't on grand pronouncements or dramatic rituals with sacrificing entire herds of cattle. We're focusing on the quiet, personal devotion, the kind that happened every day in ancient Greece, away from the big festivals. The kind of devotion that involved maybe just bringing a small offering, lighting a lamp, or saying a few hushed words. This specific act, offering a pomegranate to Zeus, might not be the most famous historical ritual, but it's precisely in these less dramatized moments that we can sometimes glimpse the everyday reality of ancient life. It's history at a walking pace, history you can almost touch and feel and, yes, maybe even fall asleep to. So, your mission, should you choose to accept it, by staying awake, is to walk through this process step by step. From understanding where this fascinating fruit even came from, to figuring out why it ended up in a temple dedicated to Zeus, to the nitty-gritty details of how you would actually prepare it. What tools would you use? How would you make the cut? How would you present it? These are the questions that will gently guide us through the quiet corridors of the past. We'll uncover some mainstream historical facts about offerings, stumble upon a quirky tidbit or two about ancient fruit preparation, and perhaps brush up against an open scholarly debate because, let's face it, historians still argue whether the perfect pomegranate offering required an odd or even number of seeds presented. Yes, really. Important stuff, clearly. The air in the temple shifts subtly as the light outside fades. The silence deepens. You are alone, or perhaps just with a few temple attendants who move with the hushed efficiency of librarians in a very old, very important library. This is your task. Your quiet, slightly tedious, sleep-inducing task. To take this single, perfect pomegranate, and prepare it as an offering for the most powerful god in the pantheon. It requires patience. It requires a steady hand. It requires an understanding, however vague, of the layers of meaning contained within this single, unassuming fruit. It's less about divine intervention and more about meticulous knife work and presentation skills. Honestly, it sounds a bit like prepping a charcuterie board for a picky relative. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down, not in a heavy, oppressive way, but in a soft, comforting blanket of time. People have been performing small acts like this for millennia, in countless temples, for countless gods. This specific act, with this specific fruit and this specific deity, is just one thread in that vast, intricate tapestry. And you, right now, are holding that thread. Your fingers trace the outline of the fruit again. It's cool, firm, promising. The real work, the quiet, repetitive, potentially sleep-inducing work, is about to begin. We're not conquering Troy tonight. We're learning how to cut a pomegranate. And trust me, that might be the most boring, and therefore most effective, way to drift off. You're still holding that pomegranate, right? That cool, firm weight in your palm. It feels solid, ancient, like it holds secrets within its tough rind. And honestly, it does. Because before this particular pomegranate made its way into your hands, destined for a date with Zeus's potential approval, or indifference, gods are busy, it had to come from somewhere. And not just from a tree down the street. We're talking way, way back. The deep history of this humble fruit. Imagine, if you can bear the mental exertion, a landscape far removed from the marble temples of Greece. Think rugged mountains, fertile river valleys, a place where agriculture was taking root, where humans were first figuring out how to coax food from the earth on a grander scale than just foraging. We're talking the area stretching from modern-day Iran across towards northern India. This is the generally accepted birthplace, the ancestral homeland, of the pomegranate. It didn't just pop into existence in Greece like Athena from Zeus's head, minus the headache, presumably. So, picture this, wild pomegranate bushes, thorny and resilient, growing alongside ancient rivers or on sun-drenched hillsides. They weren't necessarily the big, juicy specimens you see in the market today. They were probably smaller, perhaps more tart, but undoubtedly recognizable. And at some point, early humans stumbled upon them. Maybe they were attracted by the vibrant red flowers, or perhaps they saw animals feasting on the fruit. Curiosity, or maybe just extreme hunger, led them to try it. And lo and behold, they discovered the clusters of jewel-like seeds hidden inside, bursting with a sweet tart flavor. This discovery wasn't just a tasty snack, it was the beginning of a relationship. Like a very, very long-term, slightly complicated relationship between humans and a plant. Early farmers, keen observers of nature, would have noticed where the best bushes grew, which ones produced the most fruit, and over generations, they would have started cultivating them. Selecting seeds from the best fruits, planting them near their settlements, maybe even trying early forms of irrigation. This slow, deliberate process of domestication is a mainstream historical fact. Humans didn't just find pomegranates, they helped create the pomegranates we know today through selective farming. It's like the ancient version of a glow-up. Now, these early pomegranates weren't just for eating. Oh no! Ancient peoples were remarkably resourceful, especially when it came to plants. The bark, the leaves, the roots, even the rind of the fruit, they all had potential uses. For example, a quirky tidbit is that the rind and bark were widely used in ancient medicine, particularly as a remedy for intestinal parasites. Imagine explaining that one to your doctor today. Yes, I've got a bit of a bug. I've been chewing on pomegranate bark. Seems legit. They also used the rind as a dye, creating beautiful, fast colors for textiles. So this fruit was a snack, a medicine cabinet, and a paint pot all in one. Talk about multi-talented. The process of domestication and early spread wasn't recorded in neat historical logs, of course. We're piecing this together from archaeology, ancient texts, when they exist and are decipherable, and genetic studies of the fruit itself. Because of this, historians still argue whether the primary driver for the initial domestication of the pomegranate was its value as a food source, its significant medicinal properties, or perhaps its symbolic and ritualistic potential that became apparent very early on. Was it cultivated because it tasted good, because it cured stomach aches, or because those deep red seeds looked a bit like blood and fertility and got people thinking? It's hard to say for sure, lost in the mists of prehistory. Think about the scale of time involved. We're talking thousands of years ago, long before Homer was even a twinkle in his ancestors' eyes. Humans in places like modern-day Iran and Afghanistan were already getting familiar with this fruit, cultivating it, incorporating it into their lives. It was becoming part of their diet, their healing practices, perhaps even their earliest forms of worship or symbolism. This wasn't a quick fad. It was a slow, steady integration into the fabric of human civilization in its cradle. The feeling of the pomegranate in your hand changes slightly as you contemplate its journey. It's not just a piece of fruit anymore, it's a time capsule. It carries the legacy of those early cultivators, their quiet efforts to nurture and propagate it. It smells faintly earthy, maybe a little sweet if you get close enough to the stem scar. That scent has been associated with human life for millennia. It was in the air in ancient gardens, ancient markets, ancient healing huts. Imagine the effort involved in those early days. No supermarkets, obviously. No refrigeration. You had to plant it, water it, or rely on the rain, protect it from pests and animals, and then harvest it at just the right time. It was a significant investment of time and energy. So, it must have been valuable. Valuable enough to warrant that effort. Valuable enough to be carried from place to place as people migrated, traded, or conquered. It became a traveler, moving slowly but surely across the ancient world, a small, hard-shelled package of potential wealth, health, and meaning. It's the original influencer fruit, basically. The stories and uses started to accumulate around it like barnacles on a very slow-moving ship. Myths began to attach themselves to its striking appearance and its hidden bounty of seeds. Its perceived medicinal properties solidified its place in traditional healing systems across vast distances. Its role in dyes made it economically important. It wasn't just a fruit, it was becoming a concept, an idea, something woven into the very way people understood the world around them. And all of this, All this history and symbolism and practical use was packed into that single, heavy sphere you're still holding. It's almost overwhelming when you think about it, isn't it? This unassuming object connecting you directly to people living thousands of years ago in a completely different part of the world. They held pomegranates too. They cut them open, maybe marveled at the structure inside, just like you might. They perhaps offered them to their own deities, long before the concept of Zeus even existed. The continuity is quite soothing, in a strange, historical way. Like finding out your ancient ancestors also struggled to peel a difficult fruit. Some things never change. As you continue to hold the pomegranate, feeling its cool, firm presence, let your mind drift back to those ancient landscapes. The Zagros Mountains, the Fertile Crescent. The quiet labor of early farmers tending to their thorny bushes. The first time someone successfully used dried pomegranate rind to stop a stubborn case of, well, you get the idea. The slow, steady spread of this remarkable fruit across continents. All leading, eventually, to this moment, in an ancient Greek temple, in our collective imagination, at least, preparing to offer it to the guy in charge of thunder. It's been a long journey for the pomegranate. So, you've got this pomegranate, tracing its lineage back to the rugged hills and valleys of what's now Iran and surrounding areas. But how did it get from there, thousands of miles away, to the sunny shores of ancient Greece, ready to be part of your quiet offering ritual to Zeus? That, my friend, is a story of ancient connectivity, of slow but persistent movement across continents powered by human ingenuity, curiosity, and, let's be honest, a desire for new stuff. Imagine the ancient world not as isolated pockets, but as a vast, interconnected network, albeit one without high-speed trains or instant messaging. Goods, ideas, technologies, and yes, plants, traveled along established routes. These weren't always paved roads. They were often dusty tracks followed by caravans of camels or donkeys, or sea lanes navigated by sturdy, if sometimes leaky, wooden ships. The pomegranate hitched a ride on these ancient superhighways. One of the primary vectors for the pomegranate's westward journey was trade. As civilizations rose in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Near East, they established trading relationships with regions further east. People were constantly exchanging goods, metals, textiles, spices, grains, and yes, valuable agricultural products like the pomegranate. It was a desirable item, not just for food and medicine, but also because it was novel and perhaps a bit exotic in new lands. Possessing and trading such goods was a sign of wealth and connection. It's like the ancient equivalent of showing off your imported craft beer collection. The Phoenicians, those intrepid ancient mariners from the Levant, modern Lebanon, were particularly adept at spreading goods around the Mediterranean. They were master traders and colonizers, establishing ports and settlements across the sea, from the shores of North Africa to Spain. They weren't just moving finished products, they were moving life. They transported cuttings, seeds, and knowledge about cultivation. It's a mainstream historical fact that groups like the Phoenicians played a crucial role in disseminating agricultural products, including fruits like the pomegranate, across vast distances through their extensive trade networks. Think of them as the ancient world's slightly pushy, highly successful traveling salesmen of botany. Another route was overland, through Anatolia, modern Turkey, and eventually reaching the Aegean. As empires expanded and contracted, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Hittites, their spheres of influence brought them into contact with new regions and new products. Soldiers, administrators, and colonists would bring back things they had encountered. Seeds could travel in the pockets of merchants, cuttings could be packed carefully for transport, and even whole fruits carried as provisions might lead to discarded seeds sprouting in new lands. So, the pomegranate didn't just make one grand leap, it was a series of smaller steps, nudged along by various groups over centuries. It likely reached Egypt relatively early, perhaps traded across the Sinai or via maritime routes. From Egypt, it could have moved further west along the North African coast, or northwards towards the Levant and Anatolia. Greece, sitting at the crossroads of the Aegean and connected to Anatolia, was well positioned to receive this botanical immigrant. One quirky tidbit about this spread is how quickly some cultures adopted and integrated it, not just into their diet but into their art and symbolism. In ancient Egypt, for instance, pomegranates appear in tomb paintings and were considered symbols of prosperity and fertility, sometimes even depicted as offerings to deities there, long before they became common in Greek iconography. It was like a popular foreign exchange student that everybody suddenly wanted to be friends with. This shows how value and meaning traveled right alongside the physical fruit. When exactly did the pomegranate make its grand entrance onto the Greek stage? That's where historians still argue whether the primary introduction came via overland routes through Asia Minor, brought by settlers or traders, or whether it arrived primarily by sea, perhaps facilitated by Phoenician or Minoan traders. There isn't one definitive arrival date or single point of entry. It was likely a gradual process, arriving in different parts of the Greek world at different times through multiple channels. It wasn't like a grand unveiling ceremony, more like it just started appearing in more and more places. Once in Greece, the pomegranate found a welcoming climate and fertile soil in many regions. It wasn't just grown in fancy royal gardens, it would have been cultivated by farmers alongside olives, grapes, and figs. Its ability to thrive in the Mediterranean climate helped it spread relatively quickly throughout the Greek peninsula and islands. It went from being an exotic import to a familiar part of the landscape and the larder. The Greeks, like the cultures before them, quickly recognized the pomegranate's appeal and potential. They saw its beauty, its bounty of seeds, and likely learned about its medicinal uses from those who introduced it. And, perhaps most significantly for our story tonight, they incorporated it into their burgeoning mythology and religious practices. The journey wasn't just geographical, it was cultural. The fruit was becoming Greek. So, as you hold that pomegranate, trace its journey in your mind. From the wild hills of its origin, across dusty trade routes and turbulent seas, carried by merchants, sailors, and settlers, arriving bit by bit on the shores of Greece. It dodged pirates, survived harsh weather, and bypassed countless potential consumers who never knew its delights. It's a testament to the persistent threads of connection that have always linked human societies. And now, after all that traveling, it's here, in your hands, ready for its final, quiet destination, the altar of Zeus. It really puts your daily commute into perspective, doesn't it? Just a few miles. This fruit traveled thousands, over centuries, just to potentially get ignored by a cloud-dwelling deity. This incredible journey underscores how ancient cultures weren't isolated islands. They were part of a dynamic, interacting world. The arrival of a single fruit could influence agriculture, trade, medicine, art, and religion. The pomegranate is more than just a fruit, it's a delicious, seedy artifact of ancient globalization. And its presence in Greece set the stage for it to acquire the deep layers of meaning that made it a fitting, or at least a popular, offering for the gods. You felt the weight of its history, the incredible journey it took from those distant lands to arrive here, in your hands, in ancient Greece. And once it got here, the Greeks, being the storytellers they were, couldn't help but weave this striking fruit into their rich tapestry of myths. It's like a new celebrity arriving in town. Everyone starts talking about them, assigning them roles, and suddenly they're part of the local drama. The most famous story, the one most inextricably linked to the pomegranate in Greek myth, is the tale of Persephone and Hades. You probably know the basics. Persephone, daughter of the earth goddess Demeter, is minding her own business, picking flowers in a meadow, standard mythological origin story stuff. When bam! The ground opens up, and Hades, the gloomy king of the underworld, pops out in his chariot and snatches her away to be his queen. Demeter, understandably distraught, throws a cosmic tantrum, causing eternal winter and famine on Earth until Zeus intervenes. The deal is struck. Persephone can return, but only if she hasn't eaten anything in the underworld. It's the ancient world's version of checking your kids' pockets after they visit a questionable friend's house. And what does Hades do? He slyly offers her a pomegranate. She eats, depending on the version, anywhere from 1 to 6 seeds. Just a few tiny, juicy seeds. But those few seeds are enough. By consuming the food of the dead, she becomes bound to the underworld for a portion of the year, usually corresponding to the number of seeds she ate. This myth cements the pomegranate's connection to death, the underworld, and the cycle of life and death, represented by Persephone's annual return to her mother, bringing spring and summer, and her descent back to Hades, bringing autumn and winter. This connection to the underworld and the cycles of nature is a mainstream historical fact about the pomegranate's symbolism in Greek religion and mythology. It wasn't just a pretty fruit, it was a symbol of the inescapable pull of death and the promise of rebirth. Bit heavy for a snack, right? But the pomegranate's symbolism wasn't only about death and the underworld. Oh no, this is a multi-layered fruit. It's also a powerful symbol of fertility, abundance, and marriage. Think about all those seeds packed tightly inside the rind. It looks like nature's own little treasure chest of potential life. Because of this visual bounty, the pomegranate became associated with goddesses like Hera, the goddess of marriage and childbirth, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, who was sometimes said to have planted the first pomegranate tree. At Greek weddings, brides sometimes wore crowns woven with pomegranate leaves, or carried pieces of the fruit, symbolizing the hope for a fruitful, pun intended, marriage and many children. So, it's a fruit that simultaneously represents the grim reality of death and the joyous potential of new life. It's like throwing a party playlist together that goes straight from a funeral dirge to a baby shower anthem. Confusing, but undeniably symbolic. There are also less prominent, perhaps more regional, myths and beliefs connected to the fruit. For instance, a quirky tidbit is that in some local traditions, breaking open a pomegranate was part of rituals intended to ward off evil spirits or bring good fortune. The act of scattering the seeds was perhaps seen as releasing abundance or breaking a spell. It's like popping ancient bubble wrap, but with more mystical intent. Imagine the mess on the temple floor, though. Oops, dropped the good fortune. Guess we'll need another one. The sheer versatility of its symbolism is one of the reasons it appears so frequently in Greek art, pottery, and religious contexts. You see depictions of it in scenes related to Persephone, sure, but also in purely decorative contexts, or alongside deities associated with nature and fertility. It was visually appealing and conceptually loaded. But how did the Greeks arrive at this complex symbolism? Did they look at the fruit and think, wow, so many seeds, totally fertility, or did they already have concepts of life, death, and cyclical renewal that the fruit conveniently fit into? This is where historians still argue whether the pomegranate's symbolism originated in Greece based on its appearance and perceived properties, or if the core symbolic meanings, especially the fertility/underworld link, arrived with the fruit itself from its eastern homelands, already embedded in the beliefs of the cultures who first cultivated it. Was it an indigenous symbolic development, or an imported one? The truth is probably a bit of both, a blending of existing Greek ideas with the symbolism that traveled along those ancient trade routes we talked about. Think about it. A fruit arrives from a faraway, mysterious land. It looks unlike much else, that tough exterior, the hidden treasure inside. People notice its medicinal uses, its vibrant color. They see the countless seeds, a clear visual metaphor for fertility. And then, someone incorporates it into a powerful story about a goddess pulled into the realm of the dead, her return dictated by this very fruit. It's a perfect storm of visual cues, practical uses, and narrative power. So, as you hold that pomegranate, soon to be prepared for Zeus, remember the weight of these stories. Remember Persephone's forced marriage and the rhythm of the seasons dictated by our fate. Remember the hope for abundant harvests and fruitful families represented by its countless seeds. Remember the mystery of its origins and how its meaning might have traveled across continents just like the fruit itself. It's not just a fruit anymore, it's a narrative device, a symbol of fundamental aspects of the human condition, life, death, and the bittersweet dance between them. And yet, despite all this heavy symbolism, you are just preparing it for an offering. It's a quiet act. No dramatic renditions of the Persephone myth required. Just a careful hand and perhaps a quiet thought about what this fruit represents. It's a reminder that even the most powerful symbols can be handled in small, personal ways. You don't need to be a hero or a priestess, you just need a pomegranate and the knowledge of how to present it respectfully. Which, conveniently, is exactly what we're trying to fall asleep learning about tonight. You've pondered the myth of Persephone, felt the weight of the fruit's underworld connections, and considered its potent symbolism of fertility and abundance. But while the Persephone story might be the most famous mythological tie, the pomegranate wasn't exclusive to the realms of the dead or the cycles of agriculture. It was a fruit with wide-ranging appeal, not just to mortals, but to the divine residents of Mount Olympus and beyond. Think of it as a very popular item on the ancient divine gift registry. So, while your specific task tonight is about presenting one to Zeus, it's worth noting that other gods and goddesses also had a sweet spot for the humble pomegranate, or at least, were associated with its symbolism in ways that might have prompted offerings their way too. It wasn't a one-god fruit. This broad association is a mainstream historical fact. Pomegranates frequently appear in votive offerings and religious imagery connected to several members of the Greek pantheon, not just Hades and Demeter. Who else was on the pomegranate fan club list? Well, Hera, for one. Zeus's often aggrieved wife, the queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, women, childbirth, and family. Given the pomegranate's strong links to fertility and the bounty of children, all those seeds, it makes perfect sense that it would be closely associated with Hera. She was the ultimate divine matriarch, the protector of the marital bond. Offering a pomegranate to Hera might have been a way for a couple to pray for a fertile union, safe childbirth, or the general well-being of their family. You can almost picture it, a hopeful bride and groom presenting a perfectly cut fruit, silently wishing for a family as abundant as the seeds within. Much less stressful than sacrificing a bull, right? And slightly less messy for your wedding clothes. Then there's Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. Again, the fertility aspect is a clear link. Some myths even claim Aphrodite herself planted the first pomegranate tree on the island of Cyprus after her birth from the sea foam. Whether or not you buy that origin story, and frankly, most ancient origin stories require a significant suspension of disbelief, the connection stuck. Pomegranates were seen as aphrodisiacs in some traditions, symbols of passionate love and the fruits, again, pun intended, of desire. Offering a pomegranate to Aphrodite might have been about seeking love, enhancing one's beauty, or praying for passion in a relationship. It adds a touch of romance to the otherwise potentially gloomy or domestic symbolism. Imagine leaving a pomegranate on Aphrodite's altar hoping to, like, get a text back from your crush. Ancient dating was weird. Beyond the main Olympians, the pomegranate pops up in relation to other deities and figures. It's sometimes associated with Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and fertility of the land, though this connection is less prominent than with Demeter, Hera, or Aphrodite. It might appear alongside the Ori, the goddesses of the seasons, or various local nymphs associated with springs or fruit trees. It's a versatile symbol, fitting into different divine portfolios depending on the specific aspect of life or nature being invoked. A quirky tidbit related to this broader association is the architectural use of the pomegranate motif. You don't just see pomegranates offered in temples, you see them incorporated into the temples themselves. pomegranate shapes appear as decorative elements on columns, altars, and religious objects in sanctuaries dedicated not just to fertility goddesses but sometimes even to gods of healing or protection. It was like a subtle visual reminder of abundance and life, woven into the very fabric of sacred spaces. It's the ancient Greek equivalent of putting a tiny, symbolic fruit sticker on everything. So, while you are focusing on Zeus tonight, it's important context that the pomegranate wasn't just his thing, or Persephone's thing. It was a significant religious symbol used across the pantheon. This raises an interesting point that historians still argue whether the pomegranate's initial strong association in Greece was primarily tied to the chthonic underworld, deities like Demeter and Persephone due to the Persephone myth, or if its associations with Olympian goddesses like Hera and Aphrodite, representing broader life-affirming concepts like marriage and fertility, were equally or even more central to its widespread use as an offering. Was it primarily a fruit of death and rebirth, or a fruit of life and love? Or did its meaning fluidly shift depending on which god you were offering it to? It's a divine identity crisis for a piece of fruit. This fluidity of meaning is one of the fascinating things about ancient religious practice. Symbols could be incredibly potent, but also adaptable. The same pomegranate you might offer to Demeter with a prayer for a good harvest, you might offer to Hera hoping for a healthy child, or to Aphrodite wishing for success and love. The fruit remained the same, but your intention, and the deity you addressed, colored its meaning. It's like how a single word can mean entirely different things depending on the context and who is saying it. Considering this, preparing your pomegranate for Zeus feels slightly more specific. While Zeus was the king, the ultimate authority, he wasn't primarily known as a god of fertility in the same way Demeter or Hera were, despite his numerous offspring, legitimate and otherwise. He was the god of the sky, thunder, law, order, and hospitality. So, why a pomegranate for him? Could it be a general offering of respect, acknowledging his supreme power and the abundance over which he ultimately presided? Or perhaps, given his active personal life, was it sometimes offered to him as Hera's husband, acknowledging their divine marriage and hoping for the stability of their union, and by extension, the cosmic order? This is part of the quiet contemplation that might accompany your task. As you ready the fruit, you're not just performing a physical action, you're engaging with layers of belief and tradition. You're holding an object associated with the cycles of nature, the bonds of marriage, the mysteries of death, and the forces of love and abundance. And you're about to present it to the God who, arguably, presided over all of these domains, even if he didn't specialize in them. So, the pomegranate's journey from distant lands to Greek soil led it to become a versatile symbol embraced by multiple deities. It wasn't confined to one niche, it was a widespread expression of fundamental human concerns related to life, death, fertility, and relationships. Understanding this broader context makes your specific offering to Zeus part of a larger pattern of devotion, a quiet act within a vibrant religious landscape. It's just one small thread in the rich tapestry of ancient Greek piety, a tapestry woven with offerings of everything from simple fruits to elaborate animal sacrifices. And you, holding that single pomegranate, are connected to that whole system, however sleepily. Alright, you've got your pomegranate, steeped in history and mythology, feeling heavy with all that symbolism. Now, let's turn our attention to the intended recipient of this quiet offering, Zeus. The big guy. The king of the gods. Ruler of Mount Olympus. Wielder of the lightning bolt. The one with the long beard and the complicated family tree. Before you get too intimidated by the idea of preparing a snack for the ultimate divine authority, let's take a breath. Our focus isn't on his tempestuous temper or his legendary philandering ways. We're trying to relax, not get stressed about ancient godly drama. We're just acknowledging his position. In the Greek pantheon, Zeus was at the absolute pinnacle. He was the chief deity, the ultimate arbiter of justice, at least, divine justice, which could be pretty arbitrary by human standards, the protector of kings and rulers, and the god of the sky, weather, thunder, and lightning. He was, in short, the boss. A fact so widely accepted it barely needs saying, but there's your mainstream historical fact about his position in the hierarchy. Being the king meant he received a lot of attention. Major festivals, grand sacrifices, elaborate temples built in his honor across the Greek world. People prayed to him for victory in battle, for favorable weather for crops, for justice in disputes, for protection on journeys. He was the go-to god for the big stuff, the overarching forces that shaped human destiny. He was the ultimate authority figure, the one you went to when you needed the cosmic CEO to sign off on something important. But like any good boss, he also received smaller tokens of respect and devotion. Not every interaction with the divine required a full-scale sacrifice. Sometimes, it was about acknowledging his supreme power through simple acts of piety. Offering a piece of fruit, lighting a lamp, pouring a libation, a drink offering, usually wine or oil. These were the everyday ways people connected with the gods, including Zeus. It wasn't always about asking for something. Sometimes it was just saying, "Hey, I acknowledge you exist and you're in charge. Hope you're having a good day up there." Zeus's personality in myths is complex. He could be majestic and wise, upholding order and dispensing justice. And he could be volatile, easily angered, and prone to sneaking off disguised as various animals, or golden showers. Remember that, to pursue mortal women, much to Hera's eternal frustration. He was powerful, unpredictable, and utterly central to the Greek worldview. He embodied both the awe-inspiring power of nature, thunder and lightning, and the human concepts of authority and order. Despite his grandeur and his sometimes questionable behavior, he wasn't necessarily directly linked to the symbolism of the pomegranate in the same deep, intrinsic way that Demeter, Earth, Harvest, or Hades, Underworld, were. He didn't have a famous myth about eating a pomegranate or planting one. So why offer one to him? This is where the meaning becomes a little less about the specific symbolism of the fruit itself, fertility, death, etc., and more about the act of offering a valuable, symbolic item to the chief deity. Perhaps it was an offering acknowledging the general abundance that ultimately flowed from the heavens, over which Zeus presided. The fruit, representing fertility and bounty, could be seen as a product of the earth blessed by the sky god's rain and sun. Or maybe, given his role as protector of marriage, even if his own was rocky, the pomegranate's association with Hera and marriage made it a fitting offering for her husband as well, perhaps seeking his blessing on a union or acknowledging his role in upholding social order, including the institution of marriage. A quirky tidbit here is that while Zeus is most famous for lightning, some ancient sources connect him in subtle ways to fertility and agriculture, sometimes receiving offerings alongside Demeter or other earth deities, particularly in certain regional cults. He wasn't just the sky god, his rain was vital for crops, his thunder cleared the air. So, the lines between divine portfolios weren't always strictly drawn. It's like finding out your company's IT guy also moonlights as a surprisingly good amateur baker. Historians still argue whether specific offerings like fruits or grains to Zeus were primarily expressions of generalized piety acknowledging his supremacy, or if they carried more nuanced meanings related to his specific aspects like weather control, protection of justice, or his, indirect, role in facilitating the abundance of the land through rain. Was a pomegranate to Zeus a deeply symbolic act, or just a polite thinking of you gift for the boss god? We don't have direct ancient texts explaining every specific offering's rationale. What we do know is that presenting any offering to a god was an act of respect, a way of establishing or maintaining a connection. It was about acknowledging the divine realm and humanity's place within it. And presenting a fruit as rich in symbolism and history as the pomegranate would undoubtedly have been seen as a meaningful gesture, regardless of the exact shade of symbolism being invoked. So, as you prepare this fruit, remember who it's for. The one who sits on the highest throne, who could shake the heavens with a nod. but also the one who received prayers for everyday concerns, who was woven into the fabric of daily life as much as he was into the grand cosmic dramas. Your offering isn't about appeasing a monster, it's about connecting with the ultimate power in the universe, in a quiet, traditional way. It's like sending a thank you note to the manager after a particularly good celestial performance. Holding the pomegranate, you can almost feel the subtle energy shift in the temple space. It's dedicated to Zeus. High ceilings, perhaps an enormous statue of the god looming somewhere, trying not to look too imposing, hopefully. This is his house, his domain on earth. And you are about to perform an act that has been repeated countless times within these walls, by countless individuals seeking connection, blessing, or simply fulfilling their duty. It's a quiet, domestic act of faith, directed towards the most powerful force the ancient Greeks could imagine. And it all starts with carefully preparing this simple, yet deeply meaningful, fruit. The weight in your hand feels a little different now, doesn't it? Charged with the presence of the king. So, you've got the pomegranate, you've got the recipient, the big Z, and you're standing in a temple, or at least imagining yourself there with impressive detail, right down to the dust motes. But which temple? Zeus had sanctuaries, shrines, and monumental temples scattered throughout the Greek world. Visiting one of these sacred spaces was part of the process for making an offering. You weren't just leaving a pomegranate on your doorstep, you were going to where the god was believed to have a presence on earth. Imagine the journey to the temple. Maybe it's a small local shrine on a hillside overlooking your village, a simple structure of stone with an altar. Or perhaps it's a major Panhellenic sanctuary like Olympia or Dodona, famous centers of worship that drew pilgrims from across Greece. The scale of the temple would influence the atmosphere, but the basic function was the same, a dedicated space for mortals to interact with the divine. The most famous temples to Zeus were often imposing structures, built to inspire awe and reflect his status as king. Think of the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, a massive undertaking, or the great temple at Olympia that housed the colossal statue of Zeus by Phidias, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Walking into a space like that would be an experience in itself, the sheer scale, the cool stone, the scent of incense, the quiet murmur of other worshippers or temple staff. It's a mainstream historical fact that large, elaborate temples were central to the public worship of major deities like Zeus, serving as focal points for communities and pilgrimage. Stepping inside was leaving the mundane world behind and entering a realm set apart for the divine. These temples weren't just empty buildings. They housed the god's cult statue, the representation around which worship was centered. They had altars, either inside or more commonly outside, where offerings were made. There might be treasuries housing dedications from worshippers, stoas, covered walkways, for shelter and gathering, and areas for rituals and festivals. Temple precincts were busy places, buzzing with activity, especially during festivals. However, your quiet offering of a single pomegranate might take place in a less grand setting. Many smaller shrines and altars were dedicated to Zeus in various guises: Zeus Theseos, protector of property; Zeus Philios, of friendship; Zeus Horkios, of oaths. You might have a small altar to Zeus in your own courtyard, or a neighborhood shrine you frequent. The scale of the space often reflected the scale of the offering or the occasion. A simple fruit offering could be made at a modest local altar just as easily as a grand one. A quirky tidbit about temples and offerings is the role of temple staff. These sanctuaries employed priests, priestesses, attendants, and other personnel who maintained the space, oversaw rituals, and sometimes even helped worshippers with their offerings. Imagine approaching a temple attendant with your pomegranate. They might guide you to the appropriate altar, ensure you follow the correct procedure, which, let's face it, probably wasn't too complicated for a fruit offering, but still, or even assist with the cutting or placement if needed. It wasn't always a solitary act. There was a community aspect to worship, even in quiet moments. It's like needing a bit of help finding the right shelf at the divine supermarket. Inside the temple precinct, the air might be thick with the scent of olive oil burned in lamps, the faint remains of incense, and the earthy smell of stone and dust. Depending on the time of day, light would stream in, illuminating pillars or highlighting details on carvings. The sounds would be muted, distant city noise, the rustle of robes, quiet footsteps, maybe the call of a bird nesting in the rafters. It's a sensory experience, designed to remove you from the everyday hustle and bustle. Historians still argue whether the layout and architecture of Greek temples were primarily designed for housing the cult statue and facilitating large-scale public rituals like sacrifices, or if they also carefully catered to smaller, individual acts of piety like personal offerings at smaller altars within the precinct or even just quiet prayer. Was the main purpose the grand display of civic religion, or was there equal emphasis on facilitating individual spiritual connection? Probably a mix, but the scale of the main temples does suggest public spectacle was a significant factor. Navigating the temple grounds with your pomegranate, you would feel the coolness of the stone floor under your feet. The smooth, warm surfaces of steps and altars, polished by centuries of countless hands and offerings. You would see other dedications, perhaps small statues, pottery, carved reliefs, or even just simple stones. Your humble pomegranate is part of a much larger collection of gifts left for the god over time, each with its own story, its own quiet prayer or expression of gratitude. Finding the right altar for Zeus might involve a little walking. Some temples had multiple altars within the precinct, perhaps dedicated to different aspects of the god or used for different types of offerings. You'd look for the main altar, usually located outside the temple building itself, facing east, or perhaps a smaller altar inside or in a side chamber. As you approach the altar, the quiet intensifies. This is the focal point of the sacred space. The place where the mortal world intersects most directly with the divine. You've brought your offering, this heavy, symbolic fruit that has traveled through time and across continents. You've contemplated its meanings and the power of the god it's intended for. Now, it's time for the physical act of preparation and presentation, the quiet culmination of this journey. Standing before the altar, pomegranate in hand, you are participating in a ritual that echoes back through millennia. It's surprisingly calming, isn't it? Like finally arriving at your destination after a long, slow train ride. The destination being, of course, the very important task of fruit preparation. You're standing in the temple precinct, that cool stone beneath your feet, the air quiet and still. You've got the pomegranate, you've identified your intended divine recipient, Zeus, and you've found the altar. Now comes the actual process of making the offering. Forget Hollywood movies with thunder and lightning and dramatic pronouncements. For most ancient Greeks, most of the time, offering something to a god was a relatively simple, established procedure. It was part of the rhythm of life, not a constant crisis management session. The basic steps of ancient Greek offering were pretty consistent, whether you were offering a bit of grain, pouring wine, lighting incense, or presenting a piece of fruit. It involved purification, presentation, and perhaps a prayer. It wasn't overly complicated, which is a blessing for our sleep-inducing mission tonight. First, purification. Before approaching the altar or handling sacred objects, you would typically purify yourself. This usually involved washing your hands, sometimes your face, with fresh water. In larger sanctuaries, there might be lustral basins specifically for this purpose. It was a symbolic cleansing, a way of showing respect and setting yourself apart from the mundane world before interacting with the divine. Think of it as washing up before dinner, but for gods. This act of purification is a mainstream historical fact of ancient Greek religious practice across various cults and deities. So, take a moment to visualize washing your hands. Feel the cool water. Imagine it cleansing not just physical dirt, but also the distractions and worries of the outside world. You are making yourself ready, focusing your intention on the sacred task at hand. It's a simple, quiet action, yet it signifies a transition into sacred space. Next, the presentation. With clean hands, you would approach the altar. What happened exactly varied depending on the offering and the specific cult practice. For a solid offering like our pomegranate, you wouldn't necessarily burn it. Animal sacrifices involved fire, but fruit offerings often didn't. You would place it on the altar, or perhaps on a dedicated offering table nearby. It was about setting the item before the God's presence, making it visible and available to them. Sometimes, offerings were presented whole. A perfect fruit, placed just so. Other times, and this is key for our pomegranate journey, they were prepared or cut. The act of cutting or breaking a food item could symbolize sharing it with the god, releasing its essence, or transforming it from a mundane object into a sacred gift. This is where our pomegranate skills come in. Along with the presentation, there would often be a prayer or invocation. This wasn't necessarily a long, elaborate speech. It could be a simple, formulaic address. Hear me, Zeus, king of the gods. I offer you this pomegranate. You might state your name, your lineage, if you were feeling fancy or it was a formal occasion, and perhaps briefly mention the purpose of your offering, whether it was gratitude, a vow, a request, or just general piety. The prayer made the action explicit, directing the offering's intention towards the specific deity. A quirky tidbit about offerings is that sometimes worshippers would leave only a portion of the offering for the god, consuming the rest themselves or sharing it with others. This might happen with food items like cakes or bread, or parts of a sacrificed animal. It symbolized communion with the divine, sharing a meal with the god. For our pomegranate, you might offer the whole fruit, or maybe just the prepared seeds. It depends on the tradition, but the idea was that the god received the essence or the symbolism, while the worshipper might partake in the physical bounty. It's like leaving a slice of pie for Santa, but then eating the rest yourself. He only needed the thought, and maybe a crumb. Historians still argue whether the specific form of presenting non-sacrificial offerings like fruits had deep, universally understood symbolic meaning across all Greek cults, or if practices varied significantly by region and deity. Was placing a whole fruit different in meaning from placing cut pieces? Did the orientation on the altar matter? These details are often lost or only mentioned in scattered, ambiguous sources, making it hard to reconstruct a single, definitive right way. But the core principles remained: purification, presentation, and prayer. These were the building blocks of countless acts of devotion performed by Greeks every single day. It was a way of integrating their relationship with the divine into the fabric of their lives. Offering a pomegranate wasn't a one-off, dramatic event. It was part of a continuous dialogue between humans and the gods. As you go through these mental steps, imagining yourself washing your hands, approaching the altar, holding the carefully prepared fruit, feel the quiet solemnity of the moment. It's a private act, even if others are present in the temple. Your focus is on the connection between you and the god. The pomegranate, which has journeyed so far and gathered so much meaning, is the medium for this connection. It's a tangible expression of your respect, your hope, your faith. The preparation itself is where the main task lies tonight. How do you take this round, tough fruit and make it ready for the king of the gods? It requires care, attention, and the right tools. It's not just about dumping it on the altar, it's about transforming it from an everyday object into a ritual gift. And the next steps will involve getting down to the specifics of that quiet, meticulous preparation. The journey to the altar is almost complete. Now, the detailed work begins. Don't snooze yet, you haven't even cut the fruit. Though, if you did, that would be perfectly acceptable for a sleep podcast. You've purified your hands, you're standing by the altar in Zeus's temple with that historically loaded pomegranate in your grasp. Now, the big question that steers us tonight: why this specific fruit for this specific god? We touched on it briefly before, but let's really lean into the quiet contemplation of potential meaning here. Why is a pomegranate, with all its complex baggage of fertility, death, and juicy seeds, a suitable offering for Zeus, the sky-dwelling, lightning-hurling, order-maintaining king of the gods? As we've established, Zeus isn't the most obvious recipient for a pomegranate compared to, say, Demeter or Hera. He's not primarily a fertility deity in the way they are, nor is he ruler of the underworld like Hades, though he did oversee the cosmic order that included Hades' domain. This lack of a direct, primary mythological link to the fruit makes the offering intriguing. It suggests the meaning might be less about the fruit's inherent symbolism in isolation and more about how that symbolism interacts with Zeus's domain, or perhaps about the general nature of offerings. One possibility is that the pomegranate, as a symbol of abundance and the bounty of the earth, was offered to Zeus as an acknowledgement of his supreme power that ultimately enables that abundance. While Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, Zeus is the god of the sky and weather. His rain nourishes the crops, his sun helps them grow. Without his control over the elements, the earth would not be fertile. So, offering him a pomegranate could be an indirect way of thanking him for the conditions that allow such fruits to grow. It's like thanking the utility company for the electricity that powered your oven, even though you baked the cake yourself. It's a mainstream historical fact that Greeks would often offer first fruits or products of the harvest to various deities, acknowledging the divine role in successful agriculture. Another angle ties into Zeus's role as protector of oaths, justice, and social order. The pomegranate's association with Hera and marriage, and its presence at weddings, links it to the fundamental social unit of the family and the institution of marriage. Offering a pomegranate to Zeus could be a way of asking for his blessing on a marriage, the stability of the family, or the upholding of social order, all of which fell under his purview. He was the divine guarantor of societal norms. Offering a symbol of fruitful union to the protector of those unions makes a certain quiet sense. Perhaps it's a generalized offering acknowledging Zeus's supremacy over all domains, including those represented by other gods. As the king, everything ultimately falls under his authority, even if delegated to other deities. Presenting him with a fruit that symbolizes fertility, death, and life cycles could be a way of saying, "You are the ultimate power behind all of this, the growth of crops, the continuation of generations, the transition between life and death. This fruit, which encompasses so much of that, is a tribute to your overarching control." It's like giving the CEO a gift that represents the work of all the different departments, because he's ultimately in charge of the whole company. A quirky tidbit might be found in regional variations of worship. Some local cults of Zeus might have developed specific associations with agriculture or fertility that aren't as prominent in the Pan-Hellenic myths. In areas heavily reliant on specific crops, Zeus might have been invoked with aspects more closely tied to the earth than his usual sky god persona. In such a context, a pomegranate offering would be a natural fit. It highlights how Greek religion wasn't monolithic, practices and meanings could shift from place to place. Historians still argue whether offerings of specific items like pomegranates to deities without a direct mythological link primarily served as a form of generalized piety and respect, or whether there were subtle, perhaps now lost, symbolic connections or regional traditions that made the offering particularly appropriate. Was it deeply symbolic, or just a commonly available, visually appealing, and traditionally significant item used as a versatile offering across the board? Without more direct commentary from ancient worshippers themselves, it's hard to definitively say. Maybe the meaning was simply that the pomegranate was considered a beautiful, valuable, and symbolically rich fruit, making it a fitting gift for any major deity. Just as you might give a bouquet of symbolic flowers, roses for love, lilies for purity, etc., as a general gesture of respect or affection, ancient Greeks might have chosen items like pomegranates for their inherent positive associations, abundance, beauty, life, when making offerings not tied to a specific request or myth. It's like picking the fanciest looking fruit from the market and saying, this looks divine. Literally. Consider the act itself, taking a perfect, unblemished fruit, one that represents life and potential, and giving it to the God who presides over all of existence. It's a gesture of devotion, acknowledging the source of all good things. It's a quiet affirmation of faith, performed in a sacred space, using an object loaded with cultural and religious significance. The specific symbolism of the pomegranate might be less important than the act of offering something valuable and meaningful to the king of the gods. So, as you prepare to cut this fruit, you're engaging with a centuries-old tradition of seeking favor, expressing gratitude, or simply showing respect to the divine. The pomegranate in your hand is more than just a fruit. It's a physical manifestation of belief, a vessel of meaning that has traveled from distant lands and across time, now poised to be offered to the ultimate power. Its precise meaning in this context might be debated by scholars, but for the ancient Greek in our scene, holding that fruit would have felt significant, purposeful. It's a quiet moment of connection, preparing to share the bounty of the earth with the ruler of the heavens. And all you need to do is make a clean cut. Almost there. Okay, we've journeyed with the pomegranate from its origins, through its mythological entanglements, into the temples of Greece, and we've quietly pondered why Zeus might appreciate it. Now, let's get practical. Before you can make your offering, you need the perfect pomegranate. And in the ancient world, perfect didn't mean popping down to the brightly lit supermarket and choosing from a bin of identical fruit. It meant something else entirely. Imagine yourself, not in a temple yet, but perhaps in a bustling ancient Greek market, or maybe even your own small garden. You need to acquire a pomegranate that is suitable for a divine offering. This wasn't just about ripeness, it was about quality, appearance, and perhaps even a touch of auspiciousness. Finding an offering quality pomegranate would involve careful selection. You'd look for a fruit that was unblemished, no bruises, no splits in the rind, no signs of rot or insect damage. It needed to be visually appealing, a perfect specimen of its kind, worthy of being presented to a god. The color should be a deep, rich red, the skin taut and shiny. It should feel heavy in your hand, indicating it's full of juicy seeds. Selecting the best fruit is a mainstream historical fact. Quality mattered greatly in ancient offerings, as it reflected the giver's respect for the deity. You wouldn't give your half-eaten apple to the king, right? Same principle, but for gods. Where would you get such a fruit? If you were a farmer, you might select the best one from your own trees, perhaps even setting aside certain fruits specifically for offerings as they grew. This act of dedicating produce from your own labor was a significant gesture of piety. If you weren't a farmer, you'd buy one. Markets in ancient Greek cities were vibrant, noisy places, filled with vendors selling produce, grains, textiles, and other goods. You'd haggle, politely, hopefully, inspecting the fruit carefully before making your purchase. The concept of first fruits was also relevant here. Often, the very first produce of the harvest season was set aside for the gods. Offering a pomegranate early in the season, perhaps even the first perfect one from a particular tree, would have been especially meaningful. It was a sign of gratitude for the harvest and a hope for continued bounty. It's like giving the first cookie you bake to your favorite person. It's extra special because it's the first. Was there any special ritual involved in selecting the fruit? Probably not a universal one, but a quirky tidbit is that some ancient agricultural practices involved small rituals or prayers directed towards the crops as they grew, asking for divine blessing and a good harvest, part of which would then be set aside as offerings. So, the pomegranate destined for the altar might have already been implicitly dedicated during its growth. This process of selection highlights the value placed on the offering. It wasn't just about giving something. It was about giving the best something you could afford or produce. This required effort, discernment, and perhaps a bit of luck in finding a truly perfect fruit. Imagine sifting through a pile of pomegranates, carefully examining each one, looking for that ideal shape, that perfect color. It's a task that requires patience and a certain quiet focus. Historians still argue whether the economic value of an offering was the primary factor in its perceived significance by the gods and the community, or if the sincerity of the worshipper's intent and the quality of the item, regardless of monetary cost, were considered more important. Was a perfect pomegranate from a poor farmer's single tree seen as more valuable than a slightly bruised one from a wealthy merchant's vast orchard? It's likely a combination, but the emphasis on quality suggests that the thought and care put into selecting the offering mattered immensely. It wasn't just about checking a box, it was about making a genuine effort. Think about holding several pomegranates in your hand, comparing their weight, their firmness, their color. You turn them over, looking for any imperfections. You are performing a quiet act of reverence even in the marketplace or your garden, selecting an item worthy of the divine. This process grounds the ritual in the everyday world, linking the sacred act to the practicalities of life, farming, trading, choosing wisely. Once you've chosen the perfect fruit, it's treated with care. It's not just tossed into a basket with other groceries. It might be carried separately, perhaps wrapped in a clean cloth, ensuring it remains pristine until the moment of the offering. It's already started its transition from a simple fruit to a sacred object. Acquiring the perfect pomegranate is the necessary precursor to the actual preparation. You can't cut what you don't have, and you shouldn't offer a flawed item to the gods, unless it was a very specific type of offering, which this is not. So, the weight you feel in your hand is not just the physical weight of the fruit, but the weight of the selection process, the quiet intention behind choosing this specific one from all the others. It's the potential offering, waiting to be transformed by your careful hands. And now that you've got it, finally, we can move on to the tools you might use for that crucial next step, the cutting. Just imagine the relief after searching through all those potential candidates. You've successfully navigated the market, or perhaps your garden, and selected the most perfect, unblemished pomegranate, heavy with promise and ripe with symbolism. It sits in your hand, cool and firm. Now comes the pivotal moment of preparation, the cut. This isn't just hacking it open like you might a modern stubborn fruit. This is a deliberate act, part of the ritual. And like any act requiring precision, it calls for the right tools. In ancient Greece, you wouldn't have a drawer full of specialized kitchen gadgets. Tools were simpler, often multi-purpose, and typically made of bronze or iron. For cutting a fruit, especially something with a relatively tough rind like a pomegranate, you would need a knife. Imagine the kind of knife you might use. It wouldn't be a delicate paring knife or a heavy cleaver. It would likely be a small to medium-sized utility knife, sharp enough to slice through the rind but manageable for careful work. These ancient knives were often made of iron, sometimes with bone, wood, or bronze handles. The blade shape might vary, some were straight-edged, others slightly curved. This reliance on basic, functional tools made primarily of metal is a mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek daily life and craftsmanship. They got a lot done with relatively simple implements compared to today. Holding the pomegranate, you'd also hold the knife. Feel the weight of it in your hand. Is the handle smooth from use? Is the blade well honed? Perhaps it's a knife you use every day for preparing food, or maybe one specifically kept clean and sharp for tasks like offerings. The very act of selecting the knife, like selecting the fruit, is part of the quiet preparation, focusing your mind on the task ahead. The knife itself might carry its own subtle significance. While there weren't specialized offering knives for fruit in the way there were for animal sacrifices, which often involved larger, dedicated blades, any tool used in a ritual context would likely be treated with respect. It would be kept clean, perhaps stored in a particular place. It wasn't just a random piece of metal, it was an instrument used to transform the fruit into a sacred offering. A quirky tidbit is that some ancient knives, even utilitarian ones, were decorated with simple patterns or even small symbolic engravings. While this might be less common for a knife used for cutting fruit, the idea that even everyday objects could carry aesthetic or symbolic meaning shows a different relationship with tools than we often have today. Imagine your fruit knife having a tiny helix pattern on the handle. Doesn't make it cut better, but it adds a certain ancient flair. The type of cut you would make depends on how you intend to present the fruit. Are you going to slice it in half? Quarter it? Carefully dissect it to reveal the seeds? The structure of the pomegranate, with its internal membranes creating distinct compartments of seeds, naturally lends itself to being broken open or sectioned. You wouldn't just peel it like an orange. The rind is too bitter and the seeds too delicate. Historians still argue whether there was a prescribed, universally correct way to cut a pomegranate for every type of offering or for every deity. Given the regional variations in cult practice, it's likely that specific methods of preparation varied. Some traditions might have called for splitting the fruit cleanly in half, revealing the two hemispheres of seeds, symbolizing perhaps balance or duality. Others might have required cutting it into quarters or wedges, making the seeds more easily accessible or countable. Or perhaps, for a fertility-focused offering, the goal was to simply break it open carefully to spill the multitude of seeds, emphasizing abundance. Consider the feel of the rind under the knife. It's tough, waxy. It requires a steady hand and a sharp blade. The initial resistance as you press the knife point into the skin, then the feeling as it slices through the pithy layer underneath. You have to be careful not to pierce too many seeds with the blade, preserving their integrity. It's a task that demands focus and control. Imagine the quiet sounds, the faint scraping of the blade against the rind, the soft resistance of the fruit, maybe the slight creak as you gently twist the sections apart. This isn't a noisy process. It's meticulous, calm, perhaps even meditative. You are concentrating on the physical act, letting the rest of the world fade away. The choice of cut would likely influence the presentation. Slices would be laid out differently than wedges or loose seeds. The purpose of the cut is to make the interior of the fruit accessible and visible, presenting its most valuable part, the seeds, to the god. It's about revealing the inner bounty. So, the tool is simple, a basic knife. But the act of using it, the knowledge of how to slice through this particular fruit, is part of the accumulated wisdom and traditions surrounding offerings. It's not high drama, it's skilled labor, elevated to a ritual through intention and context. Holding that ancient knife, you feel the connection to all the hands that have held similar tools, performing similar tasks, reaching back through the quiet centuries. It's almost sleepy work, isn't it? Just focusing on the blade, the rind, the slow, careful cut. Almost there. You're standing there, the cool, heavy pomegranate in one hand, the ancient knife in the other. You've chosen the perfect fruit, you've selected the appropriate tool, simple as it is. Now, you embark on the gentle art of cutting, the quiet, focused act that transforms this piece of bounty into a formal offering. This isn't a rushed job, it's a deliberate, almost meditative process. Imagine positioning the pomegranate. You might hold it steady in your palm, or perhaps place it on a clean, smooth surface, maybe a small, dedicated stone or wooden block near the altar. The surface would be clean, free of debris, a temporary stage for this quiet transformation. The light catches the curve of the fruit, the glint of the knife blade. Where do you begin the cut? There are different approaches, each with its own potential advantages for presentation. You might start at the crown, where the papery sepals cluster, or perhaps from the stem end. Or you might aim for the equator, slicing horizontally around the middle. The goal is to access the beautiful, seed-filled interior without making a mess or damaging too many of those precious arils. That's the technical term for the juicy little seed sacs, by the way. Feel free to drop that into casual conversation. Let's imagine a common approach, slicing it in half. You position the blade against the rind. It's tough, surprisingly resistant. You apply gentle pressure, feeling the blade bite into the skin. There's a soft tearing sound as the initial cut is made. Then you push the blade deeper, through the white, pithy layer beneath the rind. This part is softer, but you still need control to guide the knife and keep the cut straight. You might rotate the fruit slowly, guiding the blade around its circumference. As you cut deeper, you'll feel the tip of the knife encountering the internal membranes, the papery walls that divide the pomegranate into segments. You avoid pushing too hard, trying not to burst the arrows beneath. It requires patience. This careful, almost reverent handling of the offering is a mainstream historical fact. Proper procedure and respect for the item being offered were crucial elements of Greek religious practice. You didn't just toss stuff at the altar and run. There was a method. And probably some unspoken rules about not making a huge sticky mess in a sacred space. Once you've cut around the entire fruit, you don't just yank it apart. You might gently twist the two halves in opposite directions. Feel the resistance, then the subtle give as the internal structure separates along its natural lines. Pull the halves apart carefully. And there it is. The reveal. The inside of the pomegranate, a stunning display of hundreds of jewel-like seeds, glistening in the dim temple light. Packed together, reflecting the light, a miniature city of potential life and abundance. Seeing it split open like this makes the symbolism immediately obvious, doesn't it? All those tiny, perfect seeds. It's visually striking, and presenting this inner beauty is the whole point of the cut. Alternatively, you might decide to cut it into quarters or wedges. This involves making cuts from the crown down towards the stem, following the natural divisions suggested by the outer shape or the internal membranes. Again, you use the knife with care, slicing through the rind and pith, trying to separate the segments cleanly. This method allows the pieces to be arranged easily, perhaps fanned out on a plate or platter. Another possibility is removing the seeds entirely. This is a more labor-intensive process. After cutting the fruit into sections, you might gently flex the rind outwards, tapping the back of it with a spoon or even the dull side of your knife blade. The seeds tumble out, a cascade of red jewels. This approach yields a pile of loose arrows, emphasizing the sheer quantity of seeds, highlighting the abundance and fertility symbolism. Imagine the quiet sound of the seeds raining down onto a clean surface. It's oddly satisfying. It's also probably the messiest method, but hey, maybe some gods appreciate commitment. You'd need a clean bowl or platter to catch them, of course. You wouldn't just scatter them on the floor, unless that was part of a very specific, niche ritual, which, frankly, seems unlikely given the mess. A quirky tidbit about cutting fruits for offerings. In some ancient traditions concerning offerings of living things or things meant to represent life, like fruit, care was taken to ensure the essence wasn't spilled carelessly. This might translate to being particularly mindful not to crush or damage the seeds excessively while cutting, preserving their perfect form as much as possible. It's like handling precious gems, each one holding potential. Historians still argue whether specific methods of cutting or preparing fruits for offerings were rigidly standardized across all Greek religious practices, or if there was significant regional variation or even personal preference involved. Did the priest dictate the exact cut, or could the worshipper choose? Was splitting a pomegranate in half the correct way for Zeus, while scattering the seeds was reserved for Demeter? We lack clear ancient manuals specifying these details for every scenario. This means our specific cutting technique tonight has a touch of informed imagination to it. Regardless of the exact cut, halves, wedges, or loose seeds, the act is performed with respect and attention. You are transforming the fruit from a mere object into a consecrated offering. The knife is an extension of your hand, performing a sacred task. The feel of the fruit, the subtle resistance, the visual reveal of the interior, it's all part of the quiet ritual. You might take a moment to arrange the cut pieces or the pile of seeds. Presenting them neatly is part of the reverence. You're making it visually appealing for the deity. After all that selection and careful cutting, you want it to look good. It's like plating a dish for a very important guest who also happens to control the weather. The process is almost complete. The pomegranate is no longer just a fruit, it is a prepared offering, ready to be presented. The quiet sounds of the cut fade, replaced by the low hum of the temple, the stillness of the air. You hold the carefully arranged pieces or the bowl of glistening seeds. The weight is different now, perhaps lighter, but certainly charged with the intention and the history you've infused into it. It's time to take the final steps to the altar and make the formal presentation. Just a few more quiet moments before the main event. You've done it. The pomegranate, chosen with care, transported across vast distances, in its history, and in your imagination, and now meticulously cut open, sits ready. Whether in perfect halves, neat wedges, or a glistening pile of seeds, it is transformed. It's no longer just a piece of fruit, it's a prepared offering, a physical embodiment of intention and symbolism. Now comes the moment of presentation. Imagine holding the prepared offering. Perhaps you have the cut halves on a small platter, or the seeds gathered in a clean bowl. The vibrant red of the arils contrasts with the pale pith or the surface you're carrying them on. The weight is different now, maybe lighter if the rind was heavy, but the sense of significance is certainly heavier. You approach the altar, the focal point of Zeus's temple. The altar might be a simple stone block, or an elaborate structure adorned with carvings. It's clean, consecrated ground. This is where the divine presence is most strongly felt, where the connection between mortal and God is made manifest. You carry the offering carefully, minding your steps on the cool stone floor. The air feels expectant, quiet. As you reach the altar, you pause. This is the culmination of the process. You are about to formally present your gift to the King of the Gods. There's no rush. The act is deliberate, respectful. You place the prepared pomegranate onto the altar. If it's on a platter or in a bowl, you place the container. If it's just the pieces, you arrange them neatly on the altar surface. The way you arrange it might be simple and functional, or perhaps guided by tradition or personal aesthetics. Are the cut halves facing up, revealing the seeds? Are the wedges fanned out? Is the pile of seeds shaped into a small mound? The specific arrangement might not be prescribed, but presenting it with care is key. This act of placing the offering on the altar is a mainstream historical fact of virtually all ancient offering rituals. It's the moment the gift is formally given to the deity. As you place it, you might speak your prayer or invocation. We touched on this before, but it's worth revisiting in this precise moment. It's a quiet address to Zeus. Hear me, Zeus, King of the Gods. You state your name, your purpose. Are you offering thanks for something? Asking for a blessing? Fulfilling a vow? Or is it simply an act of general piety, acknowledging his supreme power? The words are likely simple, direct, heartfelt. They articulate the intention behind the physical offering. Hold the image of the pomegranate on the altar. The bright red seeds standing out against the ancient stone. It sits there, a silent communication between you and the divine. It represents the earth's bounty, the cycles of life, the hope for abundance, perhaps even a nod to the interconnectedness of realms, life, death, marriage, over which Zeus ultimately presides. It's a small object carrying immense weight. While the exact arrangement might vary, a quirky tidbit is that the orientation of offerings on the altar sometimes mattered. Placing something facing east towards the rising sun, or towards the god's statue, could be significant. While we don't have specific rules for pomegranate orientation for Zeus, the idea that details like placement could matter underscores the thoughtfulness involved in rituals. Imagine carefully adjusting the angle of a pomegranate wedge, hoping it's the cosmically correct alignment. Historians still argue whether the visual presentation of non-sacrificial offerings like fruits was primarily for the benefit of the worshipper, making the act feel more significant, and the community, demonstrating piety, or if it was believed to genuinely matter to the deity. Did Zeus gaze down from Olympus and appreciate a well-arranged platter of pomegranate seeds? Or was the act of giving and the intention behind it the only thing that registered in the divine realm? It's hard to say definitively. The ancient sources focus more on what was offered and why, less on the divine equivalent of interior design preferences. But for you, in this moment, the presentation matters. You want to show respect. You want the offering to be seen. You step back slightly from the altar, allowing space between you and the sacred object. The pomegranate sits there, quiet, waiting. Its work as a fruit is done. Its work as an offering has just begun. This moment is one of stillness and connection. The journey of the pomegranate, from distant lands to this temple, culminates in this quiet act of placing it before the god. The cutting and presentation are not just preparation, they are part of the offering itself, acts of labor and care dedicated to the divine. It's a profound transformation, achieved through simple, careful steps. The air in the temple seems to settle, holding the weight of your offering and your silent prayer. It's peaceful, almost unnervingly calm. Perfect for drifting off, wouldn't you say? The main part of the ritual is complete. You've placed the meticulously cut and arranged pomegranate on the altar before Zeus. The vibrant red seeds catch the light, a silent testament to your care and intention. Now that the offering is formally presented, what happens next? There isn't a sudden clap of thunder or a bolt of lightning zapping the fruit. Thankfully, that would ruin the quiet mood. The moment transitions from active offering to passive waiting, and eventually, to leaving. Imagine standing there for a few moments after placing the fruit. The prayer has been spoken, the gift has been given. You might stand in quiet contemplation, observing the offering on the altar, feeling the lingering presence of the sacred space. The silence in the temple deepens, broken only by the faint sounds of the outside world or the distant movements of temple attendants. This pause is part of the ritual, allowing the offering to simply be before the god. After a suitable period of time, which could range from a few moments to longer, depending on personal piety or temple custom, you would prepare to leave. The offering remains on the altar, left for the god. Unlike some offerings that might be consumed by priests or worshippers later, solid offerings like fruit might remain on the altar for a period before being removed by temple staff, often taken to a designated area within the precinct where offerings were left to decay naturally or were disposed of respectfully. They weren't generally left there indefinitely to become a messy nuisance. The act of leaving the offering behind is a key part of the ritual. You are giving it away. It no longer belongs to you. It is now dedicated to the god. Turning and walking away from the altar requires a quiet grace, a non-disruptive departure from the sacred space. You might take a final look at the pomegranate on the altar, acknowledging the completion of your task, before turning and walking slowly towards the temple exit. Think about the walk away. Your footsteps echo softly on the stone floor, just as they did on the way in. The air changes subtly as you move away from the immediate vicinity of the altar. The feeling of intense focus might begin to dissipate, replaced by a gentle sense of peace or the quiet satisfaction of having performed a duty. You carry the stillness of the temple with you as you move towards the threshold. As you leave the temple precinct, passing through the monumental gateway, if it was a large sanctuary, or simply stepping back out into the light of day, or evening, you re-enter the ordinary world. The sounds of life outside filter in, distant chatter, the rattle of carts, the calling of vendors. The air might smell different, dustier, warmer, filled with the everyday sense of the city. The contrast between the hushed, sacred space and the bustling outside world can be quite striking. A quirky tidbit about leaving offerings is that sometimes small, personal items were left along with the main offering, perhaps a coin, a lock of hair, or a piece of clothing. These were additional vows or dedications. While unlikely with a fruit offering, which is a dedication in itself, the idea highlights the personal nature that could accompany these acts of worship. It's like leaving a little note next to the gift. Hope you like the pomegranate, Zeus. P.S. Please help me find my lost sandal. Historians still argue whether the disposal of offerings by temple staff after they were left on the altar had any lingering religious significance for the worshipper, or if that was simply the practical management of the temple space. Did knowing the fruit would be moved or left to decay affect the meaning of the initial offering? Probably not. The act of giving was the central point. Once it was on the altar and the prayer was spoken, the offering was considered received, or at least, presented for reception, by the deity. What happened physically afterwards was less important than the spiritual transaction that had occurred. As you walk away, the feeling of the pomegranate's weight in your hand is gone, replaced by the lightness of having completed the task. You fulfilled a tradition, connected with the divine in a quiet, personal way. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a life-altering miracle. It was a simple act of piety, performed with care and respect. The journey of the pomegranate is complete, from seed in a distant land, across seas and continents, through myths and markets, into your hands, onto the cutting surface, and finally, placed upon the altar of Zeus. It has fulfilled its potential, transformed from a fruit into a sacred gift. And you, the humble worshipper, have completed your role in this quiet ritual. Leaving the temple, the sounds of the ordinary world might gently pull you back, but the stillness of the sacred space lingers. You can still feel the quiet weight of the moment, the image of the red seeds on the stone altar etched in your mind. This feeling, this quiet afterglow of the ritual, is the perfect state for what comes next. The journey is over. The task is done. It's time to let go, to relax, and drift into the peaceful realm of sleep. The final moments of this historical exploration will guide you gently towards dreams. You've stepped back from the altar. The pomegranate, glistening with cut seeds, rests on the stone, a finished offering. You've spoken your quiet prayer, performed the necessary actions, and now, you begin to leave. The feeling isn't one of excitement or divine intervention, but a gentle settling, a sense of completion. The sacred moment is over, and the transition back to the everyday begins. Walking away from the altar, towards the entrance of the temple precinct, your footsteps are quiet. The air feels different somehow, less charged, as the intensity of the ritual fades. You might feel a sense of peace, the quiet satisfaction of having performed your duty, having connected with the divine in this simple, ancient way. There might be a flicker of hope if you made a specific request, but mostly, it's just the calm after a focused task. As you pass through the temple gate or simply step outside into the light, the sounds of the world greet you. The distant murmur of voices, perhaps the faint bleating of sheep or the creak of a cartwheel. The sun might be lower in the sky now, casting long shadows. You take a deep breath, the air smelling of dust and human activity, a stark contrast to the cool, quiet air of the sanctuary. The offering remains behind. This is a key part of the process. The gift is for the god, not to be taken back. A mainstream historical fact is that offerings, once placed on the altar, were typically left there for a period of time before being removed by temple staff. They weren't allowed to just accumulate indefinitely. Temples had systems for respectfully clearing the altars to make space for new offerings. What happened to the pomegranate after you left? Well, it would sit on the altar for a while, its presence acknowledging the god's reception, or at least, the act of giving. Later, a temple attendant would carefully remove it. These offerings were usually taken to a designated area within the temple grounds, often a sacred pit or a specific disposal area, where they would be left to decay naturally, returning to the earth. They weren't consumed by the god, in a physical sense, or necessarily by priests, though consumption sometimes happened with other types of offerings. It was less common for raw fruits left on altars for decay. It was a respectful handling of sacred items, ensuring they weren't treated as mere trash once their time on the altar was done. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditions, great care was taken in these disposal areas to prevent animals from disturbing the offerings, or rituals might be performed when the items were removed to ensure continued respect for the divine gift. It wasn't just cleaning up, it was the final step in the offering's journey, ensuring its sacred status was maintained even in its decay. Imagine temple staff gently shooing away pigeons from the sacred fruit disposal pit. Even post-offering, the pomegranate demanded a certain reverence. Historians still argue about the precise length of time offerings remained on altars before removal, and whether there were specific rituals associated with the transfer from the altar to the disposal area that varied significantly between different temples or cults. Was it hours, a day, several days? Did they offer a final prayer over the decaying fruit? Details on these logistically yet sacred processes are often scarce, leaving much to scholarly interpretation and gentle speculation. But for you, the worshipper, the immediate aftermath is simpler. You've made the offering. You've fulfilled your intention. You walk away from the temple, back into the flow of everyday life. The heavy symbolism of the pomegranate, the grandeur of Zeus, the quiet solemnity of the temple, it all begins to recede slightly, becoming a memory, an experience tucked away in your mind. As you leave the temple precinct, the air cools further. The twilight is deepening, transitioning from the soft oranges and purples of sunset to the deeper blues of evening. The sounds of the world quiet down as people settle in for the night. Your pace slows. The journey to the temple, the selection of the fruit, the careful cutting, the quiet presentation, it all feels like a gentle process that has brought you to this moment of peaceful unwinding. Remember the weight of the pomegranate in your hand earlier? That physical sensation is gone, replaced by a feeling of lightness. You have given the gift. The responsibility is released. There's nothing more to do concerning this specific, quiet act of piety. The work is finished. This feeling of calm, of having completed a task, of settling into the quiet of the evening, is exactly what we've been aiming for. The historical journey, with its mundane details and surprising symbolism, has served its purpose. It has occupied your mind just enough, in a gentle, non-stressful way, to help you detach from the day's worries and prepare for rest. The image of the pomegranate on the altar begins to soften at the edges of your mind. The vibrant red of the seeds mellows, blending into the shadows of the temple stone. The echo of your footsteps fades into silence. The historical facts, the quirky tidbits, the scholarly debates, they all recede, no longer demanding your attention. They are just quiet whispers in the background, part of the vast, sleep-inducing expanse of history. Now, as you find yourself comfortably settled, perhaps already feeling that delightful heaviness in your limbs, let the last vestiges of the pomegranate's journey drift away. You are no longer in an ancient temple, you are here, now, safe and warm. The gods, the offerings, the quiet rituals of the past, they are just stories carried on a gentle breeze, stories that are helping to guide you towards the quiet stillness of sleep. There's nothing left to do, nowhere else to be. Just be. The air around you is still, growing cooler as the night deepens. Your breath is soft, steady. Feel the weight of your body settling into your bed, the muscles releasing their hold. The day's concerns are distant whispers, like sounds from another room that you don't need to pay attention to. The image of the temple, the altar, the pomegranate, it's all fading now, like mist dissolving in the dawn light. The historical journey has come to its end, leaving behind only a profound sense of calm. There's nothing more to think about, nothing more to do. Just allow yourself to sink deeper, softer, into the quiet stillness that is waiting for you. Let the peace of the ancient temple follow you into the peaceful realm of dreams. You are safe. You are settled. Sleep is here. Just let go.